Hey everyone, Dev back with Crime Hive, and we've got a new video here. There's actually been an arrest in the Brandon Rosecrans case, another Fort Hood mystery. We've covered videos on Vanessa Guillen, and then you still have the mystery with Gregory Morales, who was murdered. No one has been arrested for that. But here, with Brandon Rosecrans, we do have two suspects in custody, and I've got the affidavit here, the arrest affidavit, that gives us more insight, more of the evidence that was gathered and what really led investigators to the arrest. And we're going to talk about the bizarre interview that he gave investigators and all the deception and the lies that really come through as we go through the affidavit, and you'll see why. Now, again, before I get into this is Deb with Crime Hive. If you like these kind of videos, just be sure to subscribe. You can hit that bell notification so you can get updates on this case and other cases that I'm covering as well. So going back to this was just filed, the arrest affidavit was filed just a couple days ago, August 7th here. So really interesting information here, and I'll give a little context in it because some of the evidence that was gathered will give you guys a better insight when I talk about the interview with the suspect. So again, we're talking about Brandon Rosecrans. This case really began May 18th, 2020. That's when Brandon was discovered murdered. His body was laying on the side of the road. The 911 call came in at 10:16 a.m. that morning. And then 10:29 a.m. the same morning, we learned about a vehicle fire. His vehicle, the 2016 Jeep Renegade. And so this is kind of a dynamic, case going on here. You've got two separate things going on. And, they obviously start to investigate. They realize the vehicle's registered to Brandon. They start reviewing video early on. And this is important to mention real quick before I get into the interview and all that, because this evidence really helps investigators tie down who was involved, what happened, and then also use the evidence against the suspect during the interview. So with this interview, or with this video here, they actually saw the Jeep Renegade entering a neighborhood where Brandon's body was discovered. This was about 7:16 a.m. Then it leaves the neighborhood about 7:22 a.m. Then they have more video recordings of it being driven into another neighborhood not far away, and it goes up a hill where it's essentially dumped. The vehicle's dumped. We have a lot of video we're going to talk about that was discovered from other residents. You've got all these Ring cameras and just other surveillance video from people that's helping investigators tie these types of cases together. Video is everywhere. We're going to talk about the phone data that was used. There's always phone data that seems to tie the suspects to these cases and help investigators make an arrest. So right here, vehicle's completely on fire. Now, here's some interesting details that wasn't really mentioned before, and this is what we learned from the affidavit. What they found is that there was a gunshot hole in the back passenger side door. And then they also learned that the front passenger seat was reclined almost all the way down. This will become important here as I go through. They did the autopsy for Brandon, realized that it was homicide. There were 4 gunshot entrance wounds to Rosecrans' head and neck, and with one of the gunshot exit wounds, there was dense stippling. Now that's really important because what stippling is it led detectives to believe the gunshots were made in close proximity, and the general direction that they're talking about here was left to right, front to back, and upward. So talking about stippling here, just to give you guys an idea, and we'll talk about the suspects here in just a minute. So basically with stippling, when a firearm is discharged, smoke containing soot and gunpowder is ejected from the muzzle with the bullet. So these deposits around the bullet wound in cases of close range fire are referred to as smudging and tattooing or stippling. And so just to give you guys an image of this, warning here, I kind of showed this quickly. Hopefully you guys don't find this too gruesome, but it's important for the education here. You got the bullet hole, and then the stippling or tattooing is really, you see all these little dots and that right there. That helps investigators to know if this was, if the murder had taken place in close proximity or if it was further out. In this case, you got this stippling. The more dense that is, it shows that this murder was in very close proximity. So that's what stippling is, and I just thought I'd inform you guys on that if you weren't familiar with that. Now, a couple things here. What they learned, this is where we start to get into how they find the suspect, how detectives find the suspect. So they end up doing a search warrant for Brandon's cell phone. That's one of the first things they do. Cell phone, it's always with us. Okay, people that commit murders, they typically have their phone with them. All the data, the cell towers, all that stuff is used against the suspect. So we learn that through Brandon's cell phone records, they learn that this other individual, Brandon Michael Olivares, was with Brandon on the night of May 17th, 2020, and the morning of May 18th, 2020, which is when Brandon's body was found. Now, his name is Brandon as well. We're just going to call him Olivares, the suspect. When I say Olivares, what I'm talking about here is this individual right here. This is Olivares. Suspect, there's also another suspect I'm going to mention here in just a minute, who's essentially an accomplice to Olivares, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But what we learn is that they learned that those two had traveled together. So they start cross-referencing the GPS data from the phone, and they saw that both Olivares and Rosecrans' cell phones were in the same locations on the morning of May 18th, 2020. That is huge. All right, so they got these cellular pings that show both cell phones traveling through the same areas. If you were to look at a chart, it would show that from those cell towers. So that's huge information right there. Now, as we go down further, again, we've got it's just going into the timestamps, such as 10:31 a.m. You got the ping showing Olivares' cell phone in the approximate location of where Brandon's Jeep was found. All these little data points are linking up. Okay, now, again, video footage actually shows Brandon walking along the trail where the Jeep was dumped. So the Jeep was dumped. He's at the top of this hill. He's actually going down a hill. Multiple videos are found of this. People actually corroborated that it was, in fact, Olivares that they saw through that video. We learned that, Olivares had stopped and spoke with a female passerby who identified Olivares. There were acquaintances and family members who identified him in this video. So a lot of evidence already going against Olivares. This is before his interview, really, with detectives, which we're going to talk about. Acquaintances also noted that Olivares carried a gun tucked into his waistband of his pants, essentially. Olivares also did not live anywhere around that neighborhood where the Jeep was found, where Brandon's body was found. So they're putting all these pieces together. Again, it's like a chess game, right? They're going to have all this information, and they're going to interview Olivares. And here's where we're going to learn that his interview is just flat out poor. I mean, he just, too many lies, too much deception, almost an easy case for investigators to make an arrest because of the wide range of details that Olivares gave investigators that did not make any sense. So what we learned here from the fire investigation as well, they learned that the fire was not electrical or mechanical accident. It seems that it was intentional. They didn't go into the details necessarily of how the fire was exactly started. They just mentioned it was an open flame, a heat source, or hot surface was used, causing combustible items to ignite to start the vehicle fire. So they didn't go into exact details on that through this warrant. Huge evidence right here. They actually go to Olivares' residence, or found at this residence here on the morning of June 4th, 2020. They issued an arrest warrant for him. He was already wanted for parole violations by the U.S. Marshals Fugitive Task Force. So we know he is a criminal who, is already he's already violated these parole conditions, if you will, which allowed investigators to arrest him and then interview him about this particular crime. Now, if you're wondering what type of parole violations that may have been, it doesn't really mention that, but just to give you an idea here, the most common types of parole violations that occur is if someone's committing a new crime. They refuse or fail a drug test. That's a big one. Drugs may have played a part in this, which we'll learn about with this story here. Failing to appear in court, failing to report to your parole or probation officer, failing to pay fines or restitution, failing to attend mandatory classes like anger management, AA meetings, that kind of stuff can get the individual on parole or probation arrested again and sent back to jail. But in this case, they were able to arrest him on some violation and continue the interview and then actually interview him about this case. So just wanted to give you guys a heads up on that. Now, huge piece of evidence before we get into the interview again here was they found on the property where Olivares was staying, his residence there, they actually found a fire pit in the yard contained burned items, including a burned Jeep key. Huge piece of evidence. This was determined to be the Jeep Renegade, Brandon Rosecrans Jeep Renegade key in a fire pit, burned. Just huge piece of evidence right there for you guys. So now we get into the interview. I just wanted to give you guys that context. So here's where this bizarre interview takes place. They start to interview him, and what he says is he starts to mention that he was with Rosecrans. So you've got the suspect, Olivares, saying he was in fact with Rosecrans, okay, on May 17th and May 18th. He also says, this is what his story reveals. He says that his girlfriend, we'll call her Falcon. It's Estrelita Falcon, also known as Star. We'll call her Falcon. And so she's with him. This is Falcon, by the way, who was also arrested. We'll talk about her charges here. So this is Falcon. That's the suspect's. That's Olivares' girlfriend. Okay. Now, there were two other people that Olivares mentioned were with him. You've got Jay Smith, and then you also have Brandon Rosecrans himself. So there's Brandon Rosecrans. You've got the Falcon girlfriend. You've got Olivares, and then you've got this Jay Smith. Wasn't there. We'll learn about this person was not there. It was kind of a story made up by Olivares to try to put the blame on Smith. So what we learned, story did not match up, with the cell data. It's clear what he was saying, because he says that they were driving back from San Antonio, and when they returned to the Harker Heights area, he basically said that he had dropped off Rosecrans and Smith at a house and left him be. He went on with his girlfriend. Now, they confront him with the GPS data. He admits to lying. Okay, huge red flag right there. I always talk about that with lying and deception. Once investigators have found that first piece of deception, they've already got a lot of evidence to begin with in this case. But right here, they've caught him lying. So he asks to start over. He wants to start a new story now. So detectives, of course, go ahead. Let's hear your story. They're going to use all this information against him anyway. And so what he starts to say is that on the night of May 17th, 2020, and into the morning of May 18th, 2020, he goes with Brandon Rosecrans, Falcon, and Smith, and they drive to purchase illegal narcotics. So they're going to purchase drugs. And again, the data just doesn't match with the cell pings of where they went. Okay, it had actually mentioned that the cell pings did match them going from San Antonio to this particular area in Harker Heights. Now, they didn't find any illegal narcotics on Rosecrans' body, nor was Rosecrans' wallet ever recovered. Okay, so they didn't find his wallet. No narcotics. Don't know if there was drugs involved. They didn't mention anything of that nature in this affidavit. But what we start to learn through the interview is they confront Olivares with a photo of him holding a handgun, okay, during this interview. And then he basically says, this is where he basically admits that this was the weapon that killed Rosecrans. Now, what he says, though, is he says that he sold it to Smith that night, okay? So he's saying he's no longer in possession of it on May 17th, 2020. He sells it to this man named Jay Smith. It's a 9mm Ruger. They learned through his messages that he was in talks to trade the handgun to a third party, but it was not Smith. So that never happened. They interview Smith later on. We'll talk about that here in a minute. So Olivares told detectives that Smith had killed Rosecrans in the Jeep Renegade while he was driving. He says that Olivares was in the driver's seat, and he said that he was in the driver's seat. Rosecrans was in the front, or was in the passenger seat. Falcon was in the rear driver's seat, and Smith was in the rear passenger side seat. That's important because Olivares said that Rosecrans' seat was reclined all the way back. So so immediately detectives are learning, okay, the Jeep Renegade was found, the front passenger seat was reclined almost all the way back. So what Olivares told detectives was, how could two people be in the back of the Jeep Renegade when you've got the front seat reclined all the way back? So, he's saying that Smith slid to the middle section of the rear seats, leaned forward, stood over, hunching over the middle console to shoot Rosecrans. That was his story. Now, the angles from the bullets, the trajectory of the bullet holes, the angles that they found just did not match up with the story. Okay, so they learned that the rear seat was too small for the shooting to have occurred in the way that Olivares described it. All right, the downward angles just doesn't match. So his story is just falling apart as we go. Now, as we continue to go down here, GPS records show that Smith's cell phones, this is where they actually, because again, Olivares is saying that Smith killed Rosecrans, so they actually they get a hold of Smith's 2 cell phones that he had, right? And the GPS data does not match in the area where Brandon Rosecrans was killed at all. So they've learned, okay, this did not happen. They interview Jay Smith and his girlfriend Jennifer Dowell. This is where we learn some really bombshell information here about the murder. Now, they said that Smith had not been away from his residence overnight for the past few months and had not traveled overnight in the past few months. So this is Jay Smith and Jennifer Dowell telling investigators this. Now, what they say is that Olivares and Falcon actually came to their residence. So if they came to Smith and Dowell's residence, they shared the residence, and you've got Olivares telling Dowell that he just killed a man, and that the man he killed, Brandon Rosecrans, was being too greedy. He said that Rosecrans tried to rape Falcon. Okay, and then Dowell later speaks with Falcon, who told her that Rosecrans hadn't tried to rape her, and was actually, and that Olivares was discussing the sale of guns and a possible lick or a robbery. Now, Falcon tells Dowell that Olivares was scared to shoot Rosecrans. So we still don't know the exact reason. Sounds like it could be drug related, or there were some other possible crimes that they were looking to commit. And what's interesting, though, I think what possibly happened with the murder, or why Olivares actually pulled the trigger, was you've got Falcon here calling Olivares a punk for being scared. If you guys understand prison jargon, if anybody's called a punk in prison, we know that Olivares has been to prison. He's on parole. He's got a record. He's being called a punk for being scared. So what does he do with his ego? He waits. He was still scared apparently, but he waits until Brandon falls asleep, most likely. You've got Rosecrans reclined back in the front passenger seat, and that's when Olivares wanted to show out and make a statement apparently, and shoots Rosecrans. All right, so that's what they think happened. We got the timestamps here, which we've talked about. This just corroborates the evidence of the cell pings and all that. So that's what we've learned from this interesting interview, the evidence that was gathered. You've got Falcon over here that was arrested. Her charges were really, she was charged with essentially hindering the investigation, kind of knowing this inside information and not divulging it to police, hindering that investigation, and then also driving Brandon Rosecrans' Jeep. They actually saw her driving it in the neighborhood. This was before Brandon's body was dumped. They actually saw her driving unauthorized use of a vehicle is what her charge was. So she wasn't arrested for the murder of Brandon Rosecrans, but she's essentially aiding in that and helping in that. So a couple charges there. But anyway, wanted to give you guys that information. Hope that video is helpful. Hope you guys better understand the details that actually came into play with this case. I'm going to come back with more videos, of course, when I get hold of other affidavits, and there's a lot going on out there. There's a lot of other cases and updates that I want to give you guys. If you guys like this video, again, Dev with Crime Hive. We'll see you guys soon. Take care.